Hi, my little angels. Come in. Come, 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 come. Oh, can't any of you sleep? Okay, come in, come in. Come, I'll keep you company. I'll help you get some sleep, okay? Yes. So, why don't some of you take the hammocks? We have 4. There's one over by the door. There's one over the heater vent. There's one here by me. And there's one over by my vanity. Okay, and each one, 3 of you will fit comfortably. 4 if you're friendly angels. So please help yourselves. We have the rocking chair right there in the corner, and it's a 2-seater, so 2 of you, not 1 but 2, not 1 but 2 of you can sit there. That's it. And pop the feet up. Good job. Awesome. Now we have the big comfy couch, and I've got all these wonderful throw blankets that you can use, so help yourselves. And we've got the meditation cushions all around. Good. That's it. You're doing great. All right, good. Starting to feel a little sleepy already. Pretty good. All right, so can I get anyone anything before you try to sleep? Any beverages? I have some warm milk. And I can put all kinds of flavorings in it. We've got chocolate, caffeine free. And I've got some caramel and cinnamon, vanilla even. We can put a little vanilla in. Some honey. Milk and honey is very nice. Honey will soothe your throat too, or it does me anyways. There's no medical evidence, but can I get anyone one of those? Okay. Does anyone want a chilled beverage? I'm thinking just water tonight, guys. Of course, flavored water. We have cucumber mint in sparkling and flat. We have peach. We have citrus, and we have lemon. Okay, everybody can help themselves. You look new. Are you a new little angel? Guys, we have new little angels. Welcome, welcome. We're so happy that you're here. Thank you so much for being here. It means the world to us. Please give it a thumbs up. You can share it. Sharing is caring. If you silently watch, that's okay. I'm happy to have you here and to keep me company. But if you like to comment, please do. We love the comments on this channel. I love to know what you think and you feel, your ideas, your suggestions, your questions, gentle critiques. All of it is welcome, okay? And the reason I love doing that is because I love watching you guys interact. I love to interact. And when we do, we connect. We connect. And when we do, we take this great big world and go and make it smaller. And that's a really good thing, guys. A really good thing. And please hit that subscribe button below. Really appreciate it. All it means when you subscribe is that you're part of my channel and that you'll see my videos as soon as I upload them. They should come into your feed and you'll see them, and we can make our community even bigger, you know? And we're so close right now to 35,000. And in my last video, the one that says big reveal, I talk about our end of the month party where we have three things to celebrate. Our 35K, our my retirement at the end of the month, not from ASMR, no. And our 2-year channelversary. And I have a giveaways, guys. So I can't wait for you guys to get in on that. Just go back to that video and you can comment and get in on the giveaways, okay? I'm so glad. Okay. And hello, my little returning angels. I love you guys so much. I am so grateful to you. I am so thankful for every day I get to spend with you. And I cannot tell you how much you touch my heart, really. And please make sure those comments keep coming if you're comfortable. And please make sure you're still subscribed. Okay, great. So I thought maybe tonight, since you're all having trouble sleeping, we could do something nice and calming. And maybe we could read. I could read to you. Now, I say nice and calming. Guys, give me 1 second. Candy's here and I've blocked her table, her couch. She wants to sit beside you guys, so hold on a sec. Okay, thanks, guys. And you can just keep petting her. She'll be quite happy. Yeah, she's laid down on your lap now, so thank you for that. Okay, so I don't know how much sleeping you'll get done when you see the book. This is called The Winter Spirits, Ghostly Tales for Frosty Nights. Ghostly Tales for Frosty Nights. And this is by a variety of different authors. Their names are all in here. And I got this book from Amazon, and I highly recommend it, even though I haven't read it yet. But I like this cozy lighting. Do you guys like it? You're going to see a lot more of it because I'm trying to get back into guided meditations, personal attention videos with the brushing and the plucking. Want to do a couple of those as well, and definitely more reading to you for sure. Okay, so we're going to open it up now. Before we do, does anyone need to relax? Okay, why don't we do some box breathing? Box breathing? Okay. What's that, sweetie? You don't know what that means? Okay. Our brain is our command central. It sends the message to the rest of our bodies, So what we want to do is train our brain. We want to give it a signal to send to the rest of the body to slow down, to relax, and to rest. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a deep breath through our nose for a count of 4. We're going to gently hold it for a count of 4. And then slowly through pursed lips, almost like a sigh, for a count of 4. Okay? If you can only do 1 or 2, that's okay. You're doing the very best you can, and I'm proud of you for that. Okay? Everyone do your own pace. Okay? Are we ready? Breathe in. 1, 2, 3, 4. Gently hold it. 1, 2, 3, 4. And out. Great job, you guys. And you got through the whole thing. You're improving. Ready? Breathe in. Gently hold it. And out. Excellent. Last one together because 3 is enough. Breathe in. Gently hold it. And out. Now you can get yourselves ready because you don't need to look at the screen while I read to you. There's no illustrations in this book. So you can wear a sleep mask if you want. You can have the room completely dark. You can have a night light. You can have a lot of light, whatever you want. You can have neons and LEDs and battery operated. My only rule is, that's right, no lit candles. I heard you say it. No lit candles. Those are dangerous if you could fall asleep, okay? And you are far too important to me to take chances with, okay? Good. Okay, so I have my trusty, dusty reading light just for me so that I can read the words on the pages. Oh, I opened it up to The Gargoyle by Bridget Collins. Okay, let's just check this one out, shall we? Let's do that together. All right, cuddle in. That's it. Close your eyes. Get ready to enjoy a story. Okay, I just have to get this set up. Okay, there we go. Sorry, guys. Just keep getting ready. There we go. Okay. I know why I'm having trouble reading it. I don't have my specs on. Like, these words are not clear. That's better. Okay. It was a steep climb from the railway station, especially with a suitcase in each hand. By the time Ash reached the great stone gate that led to the old town, she was sweating, in spite of the freezing salt wind at her back. When she set out, she had thought she was traveling light, apart from her portable typewriter. But now her arms felt stretched and raw with fatigue. She gazed out at the glinting gray landscape below, longing to pitch all her luggage over the parapet and be done with it. Grim, practical common sense made her draw a long breath. She flexed her aching fingers and picked both cases up again. It couldn't be too much farther now. She had not been to Lye since she was a child. In her memory, it was a blue, summer-sparkling, miraculous place, full of mysterious cul-de-sacs and twisting streets, a bewitching maze of sunlight and shadows. She had run with Isabel, her true love even then, up Watchbell Street, giggling and slipping on the cobbles, lurching into the shocked arms of fusty old gentlemen, light-hearted with the heat and the taste of the distant sea. Later in the long evening, they had wandered hand in hand, lagging 20 paces behind her aunt and uncle, past the king's house and the old apothecaries, and the red brick grammar school, past enclosed squares of gardens, past window boxes foaming with wisteria, past old houses, houses with many paned windows, houses with coats of arms, sagging roofs, and skewed chimneys, with too many doors or no doors. It had been an enchanted day, a rare moment of respite from her father's drunkenness and her mother's scandals, a day of stone mermaids and strawberry ice, and Isabel's hot fingers in hers. Ever since, whenever she read Lye or caught sight of a map of the Sussex coast, she had felt a pulse of warmth and smiled as though it had been 100 years ago and not just 20. That had been why, oh Lord, had it really been so flimsy a reason she had let Edwin talk her into this absurd excursion, and why she was here now, chilled and aching, lugging her suitcases up East Street along a pavement so narrow it threatened to every moment to shrug her into the road. Because she had been sentimental and stupid, she had not considered, for example, that in December there might not be the same largesse of sunshine and roses. She had simply heard him say a little place in Lye, and had been so overwhelmed by the yearning and nostalgia. No, it had been that, but not only that. By then she had been desperate to nod and agree and get out of his office. If he had proposed Timbuktu, she would have waved her hand in exactly the same way, feigning ease through a fog of humiliation. No doubt he had seen through her pretense, but with her characteristic tact, he had removed his glasses and polished them on his handkerchief, blinking. A little time away, he said, that's all. Time alone to concentrate. Time to woo your muse. He replaced them on his nose. Come on, Ducky, don't look like that. I am not a bit surprised that your second novel should give you trouble, and this draft has great promise. I only feel, well, he held his hands over the pile of painfully typed pages like a pianist about to launch into the funeral march. I am quite certain that this book will be just as good as your first, eventually. It just needs a little work, and a few days of solitude will be just the ticket. She had bowed her head and reached for a cigarette. If she were a man, she thought, she would grab his lapels and haul him to the window. She would suspend him above the grinding London traffic, and while he wriggled and pleaded, she would ask him how the bloody hell she was supposed to rewrite an entire novel in 3 months when he could not even tell her what was wrong with it. The fantasy was so strong that she felt her legs tense, as though she was taking his weight. She said with an effort, and if I can't... Oh, don't be silly, my dear. You have enormous talent. You must trust that. No, he held up a finger. I won't hear it. The author of Felicity has a duty to her public. Go to Lye, mull things over, and come back for another big push. He slid the manuscript towards her. And don't glare. I know as well as you do that your Christmas is always dreary, and that damn cousin of yours leads you on a merry dance. No, Isabella's going to St. Moritz. Then there's no reason to object, is there? I wasn't objecting. All right. She ground out her hardly smoked cigarette, gathered the dog-eared pages onto her arms, and stood up. It's a quaint little place, he said. looks out on the churchyard, and the town is very artistic. All sorts of writers have lived there. But finally her feelings got the better of her. She slammed the door on him so hard that the plaque that said Edwin Guddle, literary agent, slipped and struck at a drunken angle. She didn't even budge to put it back in place. She had thought then that at least the worst was over. But oh, what a fool she had been. Since that day in Edward's office, her helpless humiliation had only grown more intense, and now the thought of being face to face with her book, without distractions, made her cringe. She would never have come. Better to be anywhere else pretending to enjoy sweaty parties in London, or enduring suspicious looks at her stepfather's dinner table, or even sitting in silence with her aunt in Norfolk, without Isabel. She halted, letting her case rest on the ground, and shook off the grasp of self-pity. She had come to the church. There, on the other side of the graveyard, was an irregular terrace of half-timbered cottages, their black and white awnings overhanging. Next to Fishgut Alley, Edwin had said, so it must be, yes, the one with the single gable and medieval overhang. Her heart lifted to see a line of coppery firelight between the curtains, and as she sped up, sliding a little on the slit cobbles, the key in her pocket bumped against her hip, and then at last she pushed open the heavy door, and she found herself in a warm, low room, full of the glow and scent of a good wood fire, and it shut out the freezing dusk. For a moment she did nothing but stand and breathe, the scent of old smoke and furniture polish. It was in fact a quaint little place. The soft light glimmered on the table and chairs, and drew answering gleams from a silver candlestick here and a ship in a bottle over there. The rug in front of the hearth was well worn, and the Chesterfield beside it was cracking a little with age. Indeed, nothing was new or pristine, but the shabbiness added to the comfort, like the worn covers of a favorite book. The lamp beside the window murmured faintly in a draught, and shone just a little brighter as though to greet her. Beside the fireplace there was another low door, which she supposed led to the pantry. On the other side a narrow staircase led upwards and out of sight. But it was only when a log fell on a grate, collapsing with a huff of spark, that she blinked and started forward to explore. She had guessed right. Behind the door was a little pantry-cum-kitchen. The range was lit and hot. Set out on the counter was a covered pot of stew and potatoes, and a dust-encrusted bottle of wine. Beside them, a spotless white tea towel covered a plump sultana cake. In a low cupboard, as she had requested, being determined to fend for herself and keep her own hours, were tanks of tins. She would not have a varied diet, but it would suffice. As she stood up again, a bronze gold gleam by the back door caught her eye. She peered closer and laughed. 6 bottles of whiskey with a note. Work well, my dear. Love, Edwin. Clearly, Edwin had forgiven her for her curtness. She searched for a glass and poured herself a generous measure. Then, with the glass in her hand, she ascended the stairs, her mouth tingling, welcome heat spreading down her throat and deep into her belly. Here there was more low beams, and a floor that rose and fell in a wooden wave. The bedroom was narrow, with a small square window at either end, and was very simply furnished. The patchwork quilt on the bed was faded and coming apart at one corner, but the mattress was firm and the sheets scrupulously clean. Next door was a larger room with a wall of bookshelves and a desk in front of a tall window. She leant over the desk to twitch aside the curtain, and she saw the church silhouetted against the charcoal-clouded sky. She was about to let it drop when a clot of darkness darted across the field of vision. She recoiled. But a moment later she saw that there was only the last clinging tuft of leaves on the uppermost branch of a beech tree in the churchyard that was tossing in a gust of wind. The same gust rattled the window pane and enveloped her in a sudden chill. It was the sort of picture that she might have reveled in, the sort that she would have incorporated into a moment in her Gothic drama, full of shadows and mystery. She could imagine Edward's pencil underlying the description of bare-fingered trees in the dense winter dusk, and gangrenous fat-bellied clouds above the church roof. The hunched gargoyles looking out over the graves, and added perfect in the margin. Or even better, if Isabel was here to shiver and take her hand and say with that breathy hitch in her voice, "Ooh, how too sinister." But tonight, being disinclined to think about writing or Isabel, she let the curtain fall and turned away. She cast a cursory glance over the bathroom, which was newly fitted and not shabby at all. Edwin, having an unmanly penchant for luxury and hot water, and descended the stairs, the lamp gave another friendly flicker at her approach, and she sank into the Chesterfield, abruptly so weary she could have fallen asleep then and there. The fire would need another log soon, but not yet. She tipped up her glass and found to her vague surprise that it was empty. That gave just enough impetus to get to her feet again. More whiskey and on to dinner. Well, if she could call it dinner. It was not yet 5 o'clock, but she didn't care. She was hungry and hazy-headed, and there was no one to raise an eyebrow if she wanted to eat at this hour. She could unpack tomorrow, set out her manuscript and notes, and her faithful Remington portable typewriter. "I'll begin work tomorrow," she said. Tomorrow. She did not dwell on that. She was already lifting the pot of stew onto the range, a little clumsily, so the gravy slopped and hissed, fragrant and savory, and the rush of saliva came into her mouth. The growl of her stomach drove everything but the thought of supper from her mind. It was still early when she climbed the stairs and let herself go to bed. The effect of her excellent dinner, accompanied by half a bottle of wine, was compounded by the fatigue of the journey. She could hardly keep her eyes open. She had often struggled to sleep in unfamiliar places, but when her cheek met the pillow, she only had time to notice a faint scent of laundry soap before she closed her eyes and was unconscious. She slept deeply, dreamlessly, for a little while, until the urge to empty her bladder rugged her uncomfortably back into wakefulness. She fumbled for her bedside lamp, forgetting for a moment where she was. When the matchbox slipped to the floor with a rattle, abruptly she remembered she wasn't at home and there was no electric light. Never mind, carefully she slid out of bed, groped her way through the blackness to the bathroom, relieved herself and padded back along the landing. But at the doorway to the study she paused. Earlier that evening she had not quite pulled the curtains into place, and there was a patch of thinner darkness where they did not meet. Through that narrow gap she could just make out the bony branches of the tree beyond the window, and beyond that the thick turret that stood gloating in the corner of the church roof. She was about to turn away, shivering, when her attention was caught by something. Some bit of curiosity or confusion, something she couldn't put her finger on, enough that it made her pause. Squinting through the darkness, as though the church was different, as if some small but insignificant aspect of it had changed. There was a scratching sound overhead. She froze, forgetting everything else. Mice! No, rats! She took a deep breath. She did not like rats very much. If Isabel had been there, she could have mustered enough bravado to laugh and pretend to be fearless. But as it was, she stood quite still, her fists clenched, wishing she could run out of the house and away. There was a cold, creeping feeling on the back of her neck, a pause, filled with the thumping of her heart, and then the noise began again, a thick, ponderous scrape, like a sharp stone being dragged across the tiles. Was it a rat? It was too singular, too heavy. She squeezed her eyes shut. Too deliberate. It might be something larger, a squirrel or a cat. But there was something reptilian in that dry slither, and at the same time, absurdly, she imagined a mind as quick and strategic as her own, calculating, advancing. It stopped again too suddenly. It was still there directly above her, and in spite of herself, she could not shake the sense that it knew of her presence and was waiting. She waited too, every nerve strained, until she thought her lungs would burst. At last, the sound came again. Not, after all, remotely human. A slow, hoarse scuttling, a scooping pounce. Now it was hanging under the eaves, above the window. She heard the onerous flick of something against the glass. For a few seconds she stood stock still, hesitating. Then, just as she brought herself to move towards it, the animal scuttled sideways and was gone. There was no need to open the curtains after all. She leant on the back of a chair, weak-kneed with relief. Oh, how foolish she was. It had just been a rat, of course. It had been a rat. It couldn't have been anything. It had to have been a rat. She would write and tell Edwin to please put down poison. But only a rat. How absurd to have been unnerved by a mere rat. Good God, she was going soft. She shut the study door and fumbled her way back into bed. For some minutes, she couldn't relax, in case the scuttling sound would recompense, but she heard nothing more. She nestled deeper into the bedclothes, and after a while a quiet rain began to patter on the window panes, and it lulled her back to sleep. The next morning she discovered there was no coffee. She brewed a furiously strong pot of tea instead, cursing Edwin, and in her bleary resentment almost knocked the teapot off the counter. She dawdled over her second cup, watching the sleep blow into Fishguard Alley to put off the moment when she would have to begin work. At last, because she knew she would despise herself if she delayed any longer, she stumbled up the stairs, drew her battered manuscript out of the suitcase, and settled into the desk to study it. Sometime later, she sat back, massaging her aching neck, sick at heart. It was only now that she admitted that she had harbored the last insidious hopes that perhaps, after all, it wasn't so bad. The few well-placed descriptions, an allusion here and there, an addition there, might solve the problem in a few days. But in the gray, miserable light of day, the morning held no illusions for her. Was her insipid, lifeless heroine really based on Isabel, whose slightest gesture could make her choke with desire? How could she have failed to see that the other characters were wooden, the dialogue stilted, the very concept of the whole endeavor entirely barren? She had read epitaphs that had more vigor than this. There was no solution that would require redrafting. She had to rewrite every page, and worse still, the precise nature of any solution eluded her completely. No spark jumped, no electricity hummed. The entire novel was as flat as the paper it was typed on. Poor Edwin had been kinder than his need to be when he told her it showed promise. It did not. The church clock struck noon. She put her head in her hands. She was glad the fire in the hearth downstairs had burned out, because she hardly could have resisted the urge to shove the whole bundle of pages into it and be done with it. Damn it. She shoved herself backwards, nearly toppling the chair. She would not sit here and mope, descending deeper and deeper into a morass of self-pity. Fresh air and exercise, that was the thing. When she had been writing Felicity, a brisk afternoon constitutional had invariably unblocked her creative waterworks and brought her back to her desk with renewed momentum. A little self-discipline, a little determination, and an absolute refusal to indulge in her own weakness. That was the prescription for her art. And it was for her life, too. She hurried down the stairs, pulling on her jacket, and she stepped into the winter day before she had time to change her mind. The sleet had stopped, which was something. She set off at a swift pace, her head lowered against the bitter wind, turning along the left side of the churchyard and slid down West Street. But she couldn't keep that pace up for long. And as she passed at the corner, she had to catch her breath. Here the walls on either side created a pocket of stillness, although the chill in the air seemed to intensify. In front of her, an 18th century house stood facing the church. She remembered Uncle Anthony pointing it out to them on a long summer day. Here, he said grandly, lives the famous author S.L. Amis. Naturally, neither she nor Isabel had heard of Amis, but they peered enthusiastically into the windows, and they shrieked and giggled when a graying lace curtain was twitched by a crooked hand. Amise was long dead now. Not much loss, she thought, to the world of literature. She did not care for his particular brand of halfpenny humor. Horror. As far as she was concerned, any writer whose plots necessitated a denial of the laws of reality was hardly worthy of the name. But a sting of unaccustomed humility followed upon that thought. Who was she, after all, to pronounce sentence on other authors? She moved down Mermaid Street, grimacing. She was tempted, passing the old inn, to warm herself with a hot toddy beside the fire. But no, she must not give in. She could not make herself fit for nothing, and she hurried down the hill, over the greasy cobbles, before turning left again. Finally making a loop, she came up through the stone gatehouse to the high street. By now her face was stinging with cold. Her shoulders ached from hunching against the wind. When she passed the bookshop, she ducked without thinking into its little doorway. She'd only meant to stop for a second, long enough for a few lungfuls of warm air. But she caught the curious eye of the shop girl and hurried into the nearest alcove to hide her embarrassment. But there especially she came face to face with the long-dead owner of the gnarled, spasmodic hand. Between the bookcases there hung a portrait of S.L. Amise himself, and below it displayed a handsome biography in black cloth with gilt edges. Apparently there were those who found not only amusement, but significance in puerile fantasies of ghosts and haunting. She glared at the old man in the painting, resenting his success, his reputation, and his sex. She would wager that no one had called him an over-ambitious or perverse, and yet she had met the pained glare her resentment dyed. It was impossible to envy a man with such eyes. Impossible to feel anything but pity and repulsion. So strong was the light of despair that shone through the innate brushstrokes. She clenched her jaw, wishing she could stare him down, but at last, of course, she was defeated. Instead, her glance slid down and sideways to where Amise's bony fingers rested on a pile of books. Tale of the Macabre, The Shadows of the Tower, and half turned away and only just little legible, Dr. Faust. How arrogant to put his own work in the same pile as Christopher Marlowe. But it was not arrogance in his face, it was horror and misery and regret. The shop door rattled with a gust of wind, and she shivered. "Can I help you, sir? Madam?" "No," she said with a jump. "No, thank you, no." And she shoved past the shop girl, back the way she had come. There was a copy of Felicity beside the counter, which ordinarily would have made her linger to admire it, secretly hoping that someone might look at her and murmur, "I say, aren't you Miss Ashwell Scott?" But she didn't pause. In spite of the freezing winter weather, it was a relief to stumble out onto High Street, away from that disconcerting picture. She strode up Church Street with a rather forced energy, swinging her arms like a gym mistress. But as she drew closer to the little house, her reluctance to return to work grew. She hesitated by the north door of the church, but she was welcomed not by the Church of England. She had known that for far longer than she cared to remember. Instead, she shoved her hands into her pockets and took the path across the graveyard, squinting at the headstones. Most were mossy and illegible, especially in this dimming light. Even though it was still early afternoon, the clouds hung low and heavy, and the bleak winter colors were slowly draining into gray. She shivered again harder. She had come past the west door to where the corner of the church roof was decorated by a blunt turret like a chimney. She stopped beside a holly tree, pulling her jacket even tighter around herself. It was made of stout woolen tweed, but suddenly it seemed as thin as a silk handkerchief. Too cold, she had to go back inside. She had to go back and work. She caught her foot on something, twisted her ankle, hopped, staggered, and swore. She reached out to steady herself, and her hand met dark, dank stone. A gravestone. Well, of course, what would she expect? She was in a graveyard. She had bent to look, and swinging tendril of spiky leaves tugged at her shoulder. Ah, S.L. Amis. part of her was pleased that she did not recoil. She only stepped back, wiping her gritty hand on her trousers. It was barely a coincidence. Where else would Emmy's have been buried but here, a few yards from his house? But surely the dates were wrong. 1870 to 1919? She had thought the man in the picture to be 70 at least. She crouched to look closer, in case she had perhaps misread them. Nope, neither was there anything else in the headstone, not to mark the grave except that. She wrinkled her nose. Some animal apparently had gotten in the habit of relieving themselves right there beside her feet, leaving a bare patch on the grass. She thought of Isabel's nasty little poodle, the sort of dog that would deliberately choose a grave to piss on, if it could, and how Isabel's eyes would brim with tears if ever anyone were to criticize it. One day someone would wring its neck and good riddance. She glanced around. Or perhaps this particular place was simply too shaded, too bleak to allow anything to grow. Certainly it seemed colder here than on the other side of the church, and looking up she saw that it would be perpetually overshadowed by that ridiculous strumpy turret, which was crowned by an irregular lump of stone. She squinted. A gargoyle. It was bending forward, clutching some implement, and after a moment she realized that it held an age-eaten quill in some of its stone claws. Not a recording angel, but a scribbling demon. "You'd better not stand there goppin'." She swung around. There was an old man well muffled, his eyes bright in a weather-ruddy face on the path. "I have every right to stand where I choose," she said, with as much dignity as she could muster. It had no effect on the old man. He regarded her rather unsympathetically. "Ha," he said without rancor. "And you've a right to stand under a tree in a storm." He shuffled past, knocking her aside when she put a tentative hand out to help him. When he reached the place where the paths diverged, he glanced back and jerked his chin upward. "Don't draw his attention," he said. "The longer ye stand and stare on an afternoon such as this, well, looking for new blood he is. He's been looking for it for years." "I have no idea what," she began, but he had already shrugged and moved away, leaving an after whiff of wet wood. She bit her lip. How stupid to care what some insalubrious grandfather had said. She did not even understand what his warning meant. She had been too bewildered to take it in. Already she could not exactly recall his words, only that he said she should not stand under the holly tree. She looked up, and she could well believe there was snow on the way, as the clouds were starting to sag low over the roofs. But even in a blizzard, she would be able to stumble across the courtyard to her church door, her front door. It was only a matter of a few yards. Oh, for heaven's sakes, I'm being melodramatic. There was no sign of a single drifting snowflake, nor a gale of wind strong enough to blow tiles from the roof of the church, nor of any other calamity, lightning, earthquake, or fiery rain. But, after all, she'd had enough exercise and fresh air. She told herself that it was merely an inclement weather, which had made her want to go back inside. Even so, it took an effort to walk along the path to the gap in the churchyard wall, and there, in the little low door beside Fishgut Alley, without once looking over her shoulder. She worked until the church clock struck 6. That is, if you could call it that. If staring at the paper and making lists of new names for her characters, and pacing and swearing could be described with that kindly a word. She worked until her eyes stung and her head ached, and she was more convinced than ever that she could not make any headway at all. At last she shoved her chair back so hard it nearly toppled, and she had to catch herself with a jerk. "Damn," she said, "damn, damn, damn," and she heard her voice crack. She dragged her hands through her hair, trying to ease the pain over her temples. It was time for a drink before dinner, and a few pages of a book pulled at random from the shelves, and maybe a bath. Time to think about something, anything else. She might even compose a letter to Isabel. No, not that. Not until she would report that her progress was going forward. She had hoped that skiing was divine and she might make time to see Isabel after she returned, if she weren't too busy. Well, anyways, whiskey was the first thing. Something to warm her blood and chase away the numbness that still clung to her skin. In short, she resolved to pass a pleasant evening if it killed her. And she did, although she was conscious that it took determination to read. bathe, and even lift her glass. After her bath, she came downstairs in her robe. Damp-faced and light-hearted, she set the table for her dinner. There was a portion of stew left. She realized now that she hadn't had lunch. She followed it with 2 enormous slices of the sultana cake and the remainder of the bottle of wine. She then made a boiling cup of sweetened tea with another slug of whiskey. At the end of the meal, she felt solid, and after another hour of reading, a Duchess in Distress, stretched out on the sofa, and she felt a little consolation. Maybe she had failed entirely on her literary novelist. At least she was earning a living churning out these terrible yellow bucks that Edwin was so unaccountably fond of. But what nonsense! Tomorrow she would make a breakthrough. Tomorrow or the day after. It was only a question of time, one way or another. The church clock struck 10. She let the book fall to the floor, not bothering to keep her place. She was tired and shivery, and a good night's sleep would do her good. But for some reason, she did not feel inclined to mount the stairs. She settled down in that clean, comfortable bed to shut her eyes. In daylight, she had pushed the thought of last night's noises to the back of her mind. But now that she knew she could not lie in the dark, wondering if the scratching might begin again. She shuddered, and a raw frisson ran down her spine. Oh, how her head hurt. She could not stray from the sofa. She already had a crick in her neck, and the fire she had painstakingly built was dying, only half consumed. Damn it, she was not a child pleading with Nanny not to go to bed without a nightlight. She refused to let an infestation of rodents keep her from sleep. She gave up and then, with a defiant tilt of her chin, strode into the kitchen, filled a glass with whiskey and gulped at it. She couldn't quite manage to finish it. She put it down still a quarter full. But already she was giddy and her eyes were heavy. She lit a candle and carried it unsteadily to her bedroom. And then, by the light of the wavering golden flame, she fell asleep. She did not know what time it was when she woke. It was dark. The candle had burnt out. She could not have moved or spoken, so strong was the panic that had taken hold of her. She lay frozen, her muscles thrumping. Was it scratching that had awoken her, or some other noise? Yes, there it was, a slow, mineral-clawed rasps. The hiss of scales across. No, nothing. Or was it? She could not hear past the roar in her ears, the grinding pulse of her own blood. The air around her was icy. Slowly, she circled her fingers into her palms, and her skin crackled as though it was covered in frost. Above her, to one side, a grayish light outlined the edge of the curtains. She had forgotten to close them. And the moon threw a square of pewtery light onto the floor, crisscrossed by the lattice of the lead from the windows. There had been clouds blowing across the sky, for the shadows grew dull and dissolved, and the room sank deeper into darkness. Someone was watching her. Not a rat, something more, something malign and knowing, something that was human enough, at least, to wish her ill. It was impossible. She had seen the moonlight glimpse. After that, the room was empty. She knew with every nerve that it was true. She was like a small animal, conscious of a predator. Instinct was so strong it overrode every rational thought. But she thought helplessly, "There's no one here, there's no one here." The moon came out again, swift as the kindling on a cold white flame outside the window. And there, looming against the net of diamond shadow, was a shape, a dense, deformed lump of darkness, an indistinct, malign, wrong thing. She would have cried out if she could, but there was no one to call and no one to help. Everyone she loved was far away. She shut her eyes stupidly, as if she could render herself invisible, but not to see anything was worse. With a reckless effort, she pulled herself up against the bars of the bed's frame. She turned to look at the window. It was there. There was something outside. Now, nothing. She only saw the church and the churchyard, with its holly and beech trees, and the moon half smothered in a cloud. And now she blinked. The shadow that fell upon the floorboards made a perfect mathematical drawing. every dim rhombus complete and unblotted. She shifted, staring to make sure. She heard a soft noise beside her, felt the light touch of something by her leg, and with a convulsive scrabble found her hand closing on the matchbox. It must have fallen into the drawn-back shears when she had put the candlestick down, so the noise had only been a horrid, half-wakened dream version of the matches rattling as she turned over. She gave a gasping little laugh. There was nothing to be afraid of. Her limbs still tingled with the aftermath of fear, but gradually her heartbeat quieted, and her breathing steadied. A night terror, that was all. She had suffered badly from them when she was a child, but she had not found anything so vivid in years. But what did she expect? She was sleeping in a rat-infested house next to a drafty window after dousing herself with half a bottle of whiskey. She exhaled slowly. The warmth was spreading back into her hands and feet. The air did not seem so perishingly glacial. She dragged her bedclothes onto a more nestling shape, and she shut her eyes. But she couldn't clear her mind. To calm herself, she deliberately summoned image after image. Isabel's face in an illustrated paper, the portico of the British Museum, the boats on the river at the foot of the hill. But try as she might, every one inexplicably turned into the Lye Church under a moonlit cloud. It was not, however, the view from her window. For some reason, her mind's eye was standing on Amy's grave, looking up, and every time that tableau, it brought her a sense of dread. It jerked her back into wakefulness. She told herself that this, too, was the after effects of too much alcohol. But it was a long time before a merciful veil fell over that lingering picture and allowed her to drift off into sleep. It was late morning, and the room was full of daylight when she awoke. She felt bruised all over and exhausted. In her dream, she had been running, calling to Isabel. She would not or could not hear her. She hauled herself out of bed, and the world tilted and spun. If she had not been so ferociously thirsty, she would have laid back down and drawn the covers over her head. She needed a drink. She got out of bed. She drank a large glass of water, which was so cold it actually eased the roughness in her throat. She then made herself a pot of tea, and, with dogged persistence and a liberal use of newspaper, managed to relight the fire in the hearth. She had no appetite, but at last the room grew warm around her, and the strong tea helped her to clear her head. There was an envelope on the doormat. She hauled herself from her nest on the sofa to pick it up. She assumed it was for Edwin, but as she turned it over, she saw her name in Edwin's handwriting. She opened it and rolled her eyes. It was a Christmas card, or a parody of one, an obscene pen and ink sketch with a frame of holly and ivy. My dear Ash, I hope you are getting on splendiferously. The publishers are eager to read it. Keep your nose to the grindstone, love, Edwin. She stared down at it. She wanted to cast it into the fire and go back to bed. If only she could sink into oblivion and forget the book entirely. Instead, with a groan, she put the smutty little card on the mantelpiece and went upstairs to wash, dress, and get to work. She couldn't concentrate. The pages in front of her were as dull and uninspired as they had been the last time she read them, and every few minutes she found that she had raised her head to stare out the window again. In her sleep-deprived state, her vision played tricks with her. Her eyes were drawn, as they always were, past the melting flecks of ice and focused on the church beyond. She had the impression that she had missed something, some movement or some change in the fabric of the building, but nothing had changed at all. She wrote 10 different opening lines, all of them labored and embarrassing. She drew a diagram of the plot. She drew a family tree of the characters. She shut her eyes and drew lines randomly between the names. When she could not produce any new ideas, she tried to draw Isabel's face from memory, tried to remember the first lines of Paradise Lost, tried to calculate how long she might live. She was going to give back the advance from the publishers, and she would retire in obscurity. A weight grew in her chest. The leaden afternoon darkened, and the room grew colder and colder. Once she thought she heard the harsh, slow crawl of claws over the roof, but when she jerked upright, her heart pounding, it transformed into the creak of branches in the wind and a rattle of sleep on the tiles. At last, through a fog of hopelessness, she heard the church clock strike 6. Dinner. That's what she needed, dinner, and the company of strangers in a warm place. She did not want to walk, merely to be in the presence of the ordinary, jolly people with uncomplicated lives and loves. She imagined Edwin raising an eyebrow. "Ducky, what a terrible snob you are." But he was wrong. It was not snobbery, but envy, a deep, childish desire to be merry and thoughtless and good-hearted. She ran down the stairs, plucked the key from the dining table, and strode out into the square. She flung on her overcoat in such haste that it was flapping open. She stopped under a street light to button it and to light a cigarette. There was a light in the church, gleaming through the stained glass windows on a blur of jewel colors. It wavered as someone crossed in front of it, and then the organ rumbled, and the beginning of "I saw 3 ships" paused, repeated a phrase, and stumbled on. The unseen player, so disarmingly inexpert, she felt her eyes prickle. As a child, she had loved Christmas, the carols, the bells, and the blown glass and candlelights blazing from the decorated tree, the hopeful boarding of gifts until the moment the day itself would arrive. She still remembered walking to church, she must have been 7 or 8, holding her mother's hand and Isabel turning to smile as they were through the lich gate. She had not imagined that when she grew up, she would not be welcome in this congregation. If only she were still so innocent, if only she could look at those glowing windows and feel the old trust, the old happiness. If only, if only, if only. Oh, it was absurd. Surely she was coming down with something, to be so affected by nostalgia and loneliness. But still, if only. What would she give to not know she was alone? "Ask, and it shall be given unto ye." She tried to swallow the pain in her throat. Once, in a dark, golden Venetian church, Isabel had scribbled a prayer request, looked up, shrugged, and said, "Honestly, Ash, darling, I need all the help I can get. If my dress isn't ready by next week." Ugh. Superstitious, she had thought then, and laughed indulgently. But now, if only. She looked upwards. The sleet blew stinging into her face, and she shut her eyes. She looked up to the heavens. "Help me," she said. "Please, help me." But some other impulse cut her off mid-plea. What was she doing? She opened her eyes hurriedly and looked around. The square was empty. No one had seen her. No one had heard her. She drew her coat tightly around her shoulders, spun away, puffing her cigarette. She hurried along the edge of the churchyard and down West Street, giving a wide berth to a house which was improbably leaning. The chimney looked as though it might crash onto the cobbles. Sleet drove down her collar and through her hair as she came to the corner, and the wind died. Another phrase of music rang out, but now it was discordant, charmless. She slowed to a halt, and then, in spite of herself, turned to look back the way she came. There was the corner of the road where she'd been standing just a moment ago. There was the church, the windows dim, the roof gleaming white under the pouring heavens. Only she saw now with a jolt that it was not the heavens to which her prayer had been directed. When she clenched her eyes shut against the sleet, she had not realized that her face was tilted towards the stumbly pinnacle of the southwest church, so that anyone walking by might have thought she was addressing the gargoyle that was crouched on top of it. Not that anyone had been walking by. She glanced around, trying to master the sudden irrational discomfort that had taken hold of her. It was mocking her. What difference did it make, she said, wherever she had directed her grotesque plea? None, she thought, for God's sakes, none. And with a furious shrug, she set off again, hissing through her teeth as the sleet ran down her cheeks in freezing tears. The mermaid was full and noisy, brimming with the cheer and tankards full of mulled ale. Although the barman looked her up and down, taking in her short hair and mannish clothing, he did not refuse to serve her, When she'd eaten her fill of jugged hare and apple pudding, she sat in front of the vast fireplace, lulled by the hum of voices, warmed by the fire, until her eyes were heavy and her limbs felt like softening wax. It was a shock to force herself out again and into the cold. The sleet had stopped, but the clouds had not cleared, and overheard she'd heard someone say there would be snow before morning. Although it was late, she took the long way back, down the hill and up again via Watchbell Street. She told herself she wanted to clear her head. All too soon she came to the corner of Church Square, where the north wind caught her off guard and made her gasp and huddle into her coat. She fumbled for her key. Something moved in the corner of her eye. She turned and stared, blood pounding in her temples, her stomach tight. It was the same scuttling swoop in the dark, and she had seen from the window the night she had arrived. And now she could see it was not the tree swaying in the window, but a skitter of blackness along the graveyard wall, a feral, almost human movement that made her catch her breath. The air that she drew was tainted with the whiff of rot and earth and corpse, stone and putrid meat. She clenched her jaw, trying to make out what the thing was. An animal? It's too large for a rat, too humpbacked for a cat. She could not think of any species that it might have been. Certainly not anything native to Sussex. It was something more, something vile, and she was afraid. The cold measure made her shirt cling to her back. She was soaked through from her coat, but it sprang from her skin. There was a shudder beginning at the base of her spine. Any movement would rip through her uncontrollably. It took all of her strength to put one foot in front of the other, only a few yards before she could open the door and slam it behind her. In spite of herself, she looked again to the side, not wanting to pass too close to the thing, and she saw that it wasn't there. Her heart jumped into her mouth, choking her. Where it had gone? Had she imagined it? But the fear would not recede. It had slipped out of sight. That was all. Every instinct told her it was still close and watching. She had to concentrate to fit the key into the lock. For a queasy second, she couldn't get it to turn. Then at last, she collapsed through the threshold. The room was dark, full of dense, dark shapes that crouched and loomed. She groped for the table where she'd left the lamp, felt it under her fingers, and turned it on. Her pulse was thumping in her ears. Something moved through the doorway. Through her roaring blood, she heard the door creak as it swung gently on its hinges. She felt the sudden drop in temperature, and she caught her breath. It's only the wind. It's only the wind. But she could not hold her nerve. She blundered forward, knocking against the side of the table, flung herself towards the stairs. Behind her, the door crashed shut, making the stairs quake as she dragged herself upwards. She did not dare to pause or to listen. If something was pursuing her, she would rather be blind and deaf than risk hearing that. She wrenched her bedroom door open, staggered inside, and slammed it shut. She leant her back against the old wood, bracing with all her might. Stars whirled and burst in the corners of her vision. A minute passed and then another. In the faint light from the window, she could distinguish the burnt-out candle beside the bed. She sprang towards it and with shaking hands struck a match, jabbing and prodding until the tremulous flame took root in the stub of wax. There, in the glistening light, she knelt down and drew her suitcase out from under the bed. She had not unpacked entirely. It was only a question of gathering her pajamas and dirty underwear, and she closed the lid. She would not stay at the Mermaid tonight. She would go home to London tomorrow. When she stood up, her head spun. She picked up her suitcase and swayed. She had to rest her hand against the wall just to steady herself. But she could not pause to coddle herself. She must get out. She had to get away. She took a breath and stepped out onto the landing. Goodness, it was cold. Was there a window open somewhere? The study door was ajar, and she felt a wave of icy air emanating from the gap. Her typewriter, her novel. She drew a juddering breath, torn between pride and cowardice, for she knew it was nothing but cowardice. This fierce animal instinct that told her to run, and to run now. She would not leave her novel behind. She flung open the study door. There on the desk, where there should have been nothing but a pile of paper, was a sickening, gleeful clot of darkness the size of a human infant. It was bloated, appallingly misshapen, like a thing long dead or unborn. It had teeth and glittering eyes, and its taloned hand held a stone pen, eroded by centuries of wind and rain. It was the gargoyle. It couldn't be, but it was. It was hunched over her manuscript, and with a sound like acid slipping through rock, its pen moved, scribbling and scribbling. She was awoken by the peal of bells. She opened her eyes to clear depthness and light of a snowfall reflecting on the sloping ceiling. It must be Christmas Day. She remembered a long night of pain and diabolical dreams, introspected with freezing, swirling periods of daylight. No doubt she had been feverish for a long time. But now her head, although light, no longer ached, and her hands, when she lifted them from the patchwork quilt, were steady. Whatever illness had thrown her into that febrile state, it had passed. She got to her feet and shuffled carefully to the door. Then, wrapped in a robe, shivering, she ventured out into the landing. The window in the study was open, and the bells were so loud that it made her teeth vibrate. She padded to the desk to draw the casement shut. She fastened the latch, and her eyes fell upon her manuscript. A drift of sparkling snow lay on the top page, whiter than the page itself, white as the world outside. But that's not what attracted her attention. She brushed the snow aside. Underneath the page was full of writing that wasn't hers. She did not consciously read what was written there. It leapt into her mind. It irradiated by her eyes and brain. It was a new plot for her novel, set out in a scheme of chapters and scenes, with here and there a phrase of description so vivid it made her eyes blink. She drew out the chair and sat down. For a long time she did nothing but sit, staring, unseeing at the snow-covered church. It was a good plot. It was a perfect plot. The novel that she could write. Why had she not considered before that she might kill off her heroine? That she might turn her pathetic portrait of Isabel into a cruel, blistering satire, culminating in violence. It would shock the world and make her name trump Felicity 10 times over. And the critics would applaud her daring, her wit, her clear-sightedness. Edwin would blench at first, but his disapproval would soften when it dawned about him that he had another triumph in his books. And as for Isabel, who might recognize herself, well, it was no more than fair after the torments of the last few years. And perhaps she thought that writing was her own after all. It was cramped and odd-looking, with a touch of gravestone about it. But still, it might be hers, scrawled into a fevered dream so deep that she couldn't remember it. She could not let superstition get in the way of artistic ambition. She had every right to seize ideas, no matter where they came from. Her gaze lingered on the turret opposite, where the gargoyle crouched, its pen poised, its face comic and harmless, under a soft cap of snow. There was nothing to be afraid of there, nor below, where Amy's grave lay under the kind white quilt, where truly in the spring new grass would cover the earth that was bare. The congregation began to emerge into the courtyard, their faces bright against the dark coats and hats, the children's voices shrill and sweet. She sat unmoving, the first sentence of her new draft beginning to take shape, and the bells rang and rang until the air trembled. Okay, I see that you're all mostly asleep. I hope you enjoyed this. Sleep well, my darlings. And I want you to always remember that I love you and I value you. I honor you. I pray for you. And I am so very, very glad that each and every one of you was born.